Comrades, listen closely, for the truth I bring is not gentle. It is a hammer striking the walls of your illusion. Look around you. You toil from dawn until dusk, your hands calloused, your mind weary, your spirit shackled. Yet who reaps the fruits of your labor? Who grows fat while your belly is empty? The few, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie sit in their gilded halls, count your sweat, your blood, your life itself as mere numbers, as mere profit. And you, the worker, the laborer, the producer of all wealth, you remain asleep. Yes, asleep. You are a revolutionary in slumber, an engine of society, yet unaware of your own power. The machinery of capitalism has convinced you that poverty is your destiny, that your suffering is natural, that your chains are ironed by divine will or by the inevitability of markets. But let us not mince words. This suffering is not natural. It is engineered. It is a system meticulously designed to divide, to dominate, and to drain your life while appearing harmless. Every hour you spend producing wealth for another is an hour stolen from your liberation. Every coin you earn is a token of your own subjugation. Every pang of hunger and exhaustion, a reminder that power has been stolen from you and concentrated in the hands of the few. The ruling class, the capitalists, maintain their dominion not only through force but through ideology. They teach you to compete with your fellow worker, to envy, to distrust, to blame each other for the system's failures. They disguise exploitation as meritocracy, oppression as opportunity. They brand solidarity as naive, rebellion as dangerous. And so, you toil alone, isolated, thinking that your struggle is yours alone. But mark this truth: your struggle is universal, your pain collective, your power unimaginable if awakened. Every worker, every miner, farmer, seamstress, teacher, factory hand is a potential revolutionary. Why? Because you create all value. You are the source of all wealth. Yet what do you receive? A fraction of what you produce, barely enough to survive, while those who produce nothing lay claim to everything. This is not justice. It is theft. It is the exploitation of humanity itself. And it is not inevitable. It is a condition that can, must, and will be overturned. The spark of revolution lies dormant within you. It has been smothered by habit, by fear, by the lie that resistance is futile. But wake, worker, recognize your own strength. You are not powerless. You are the very engine of society. Without your labor, the factories would halt, the fields would lie fallow, the cities would crumble. Your labor sustains the world, and your unity can transform it. The time has come to shake off the chains of division and fear. The time has come to see yourself not as an isolated victim, but as part of a collective, a class, a movement with the potential to seize control of your destiny. The ruling class fears nothing more than the awakening of the worker. They fear your organization, your solidarity, your recognition that your labor is a weapon of unimaginable power. For once the worker understands that every strike, every act of resistance, every united demand is a strike against oppression itself, the foundations of capitalism tremble, and tremble they must, for the system was never designed to endure justice, only to endure exploitation. Rise, therefore, comrades, from the stupor of obedience. Cast aside the ideology that tells you to compete, to endure, to obey. See clearly the world as it is, a battlefield between labor and capital, between the many and the few. Organize, educate, unite. Demand your rights, for they are not granted, they are seized. And know that true liberation is not reform, not charity, not pity, it is revolution. It is the overturning of a system that thrives on your subjugation. It is the reclamation of the world you have built but never owned. You are a sleeping revolutionary. Comrades, the chains that bind you are not eternal. The system that exploits you is not immortal. Your power lies dormant within you, and together, awakened, you can shake the foundations of society itself. The struggle is urgent, for every day you remain asleep, your labor feeds oppression, and your dreams of freedom are stolen. But awaken, and the world will tremble before the force of a united working class. Wake, worker. Recognize the truth. Recognize your power. Recognize your role not as a victim, but as a revolutionary. The time is now. The cause is just. The victory is possible, and it lies in your hands. Every worker is a sleeping revolutionary, and it is time to awaken. The worker is the foundation upon which all wealth is built, the unseen engine of society whose labor creates the comforts, the innovations, and the luxuries that are then claimed and hoarded by those who contribute nothing but ownership and capital. Every stitch of clothing, every loaf of bread, every brick laid in the construction of a building, every calculation made in a factory, and every idea transformed into a product, all of these emerge from the hands, the minds, and the relentless effort of the laboring class. Yet, despite this centrality, the worker is made to believe that their efforts are ordinary, that their toil is a private burden to bear, and that the fruits of their labor are rightly taken by those who already possess wealth. This system is not accidental, it is deliberate, a structure of exploitation that relies on keeping the laborer ignorant of their true value. When the worker receives wages in return for their labor, these wages are presented as fair compensation, as if they represent the full measure of the value produced. But the reality is starkly different. The wealth produced by labor exceeds the wages paid. And it is precisely this surplus that the ruling class appropriates to maintain power, comfort, and dominance. Every coin given in wages is a fraction, a token, a deception, for it hides the fact that the worker has created far more than they are allowed to retain. From the very moment of birth, the worker is socialized into a system that obscures the truth of their role. They are taught to compete, to strive individually, to aspire toward the illusion of social mobility, and to measure their success against others who are similarly exploited. In this way, the system ensures that the laboring class remains fragmented, distracted, and unaware of the collective strength that lies dormant within their numbers. Workers are told to take pride in small achievements, to accept limited gain, and to admire the wealth and status of those who profit from their sweat. This ideological control is powerful, for it convinces the worker that their position is natural, inevitable, and unchangeable. They internalize the structures of oppression, believing the system is fair, while in truth it functions to extract their labor, commodify their time, and deny them access to the full fruits of what they create. The workers' invisibility is deliberate. The more invisible their power, the more secure the domination of the ruling class. Yet the irony is undeniable and profound. The worker possesses the capacity to overturn the very structures that oppress them. Every factory that grinds, every field that yields, every office and workshop that produces value is sustained entirely by the labor of the worker. Remove this labor, and the machinery of wealth collapses. The power that seems distant and unattainable, the ability to challenge authority, to shape society, and to claim what is rightfully theirs, is inherent in the very act of labor itself. Every worker, by virtue of producing wealth, holds a latent revolutionary potential. This potential is not theoretical, it is material, grounded in the undeniable fact that society cannot function without the collective contribution of the working class. It is the laborer who transforms raw materials into useful products, who turns ideas into industries, and who builds the infrastructure upon which civilization depends. The ruling class depends entirely on this labor, yet they hide this dependence behind the facade of ownership, legislation, and social norms that present them as indispensable. Awareness of this power is the first step toward liberation. When workers begin to recognize that they create all value, that their labor sustains society, and that exploitation is a deliberate arrangement rather than a natural order, they awaken to the possibility of transformation. No reform, no petition, and no appeal to the benevolence of those in power can fully restore justice, for the imbalance of power is systemic. The workers' awakening is revolutionary because it exposes the foundation of inequality, the separation of the producer from the product of their labor. Each individual, when they grasp the collective truth, becomes part of a broader movement that challenges exploitation at its roots. Solidarity becomes a weapon, class consciousness becomes a strategy, and the recognition of inherent power becomes a moral imperative. The system of capitalism relies on the invisibility of the workers' contribution. By keeping laborers unaware of their central role, by rewarding compliance with mere survival, and by fostering illusions of merit and competition, the ruling class perpetuates inequality. But the truth remains undeniable. Without the laborer, without the worker, there is no wealth, no comfort, no civilization, and no profit. This truth, once grasped, cannot be unlearned. It forms the basis of an awakening consciousness that sees the world not as a fixed hierarchy of the powerful over the powerless, but as a society in which those who create life itself hold the keys to its transformation. The realization that every worker is the source of all wealth is not merely a matter of economics. It is the recognition of human dignity, of the essential role of labor in shaping the world, and of the possibility of collective action to reclaim what has been stolen. It challenges every assumption about authority, wealth, and justice. It reframes the struggle of the working class as not only a struggle for survival, but as a struggle for liberation, for equality, and for the full recognition of their indispensable role in the creation of society. This awakening transforms fear into confidence, frustration into strategy, and oppression into the impetus for revolutionary action, for in every worker lies the power to reshape the world, to overturn exploitation, and to claim the wealth that is the rightful product of their labor. Capitalism is not merely an economic system. It is a meticulously organized structure of power designed to perpetuate the domination of a few over the many. Its survival depends not only on the extraction of labor, but on the careful maintenance of inequality, the manipulation of perception, and the deliberate division of those it exploits. The ruling class understands that force alone cannot sustain their control. Open oppression, untempered by ideology, breeds resistance. Therefore, capitalism combines economic exploitation with psychological and social strategies that ensure workers remain fragmented, distracted, and submissive. Division is one of the most powerful tools in this system, for a divided working class is powerless. By fostering competition, by promoting rivalry, by emphasizing individual advancement over collective well-being, the system ensures that workers see each other as obstacles rather than allies. They are taught to envy their neighbors, to covet small privileges, to aspire toward an illusion of social mobility, while the vast majority remain trapped in the same cycle of labor and deprivation. Race, gender, ethnicity, religion, and nationality are all employed as instruments of division, creating internal conflicts that obscure the structural inequalities at play. Workers are encouraged to believe that their hardships result from personal failure, from the shortcomings of others, or from circumstances beyond their control, rather than recognizing the deliberate design of the system itself. Alongside division, ideology functions as the invisible scaffolding that sustains capitalist control. It is a constant, subtle instruction in what to desire, whom to admire, and how to interpret one's position in society. From birth, individuals are immersed in a narrative that justifies hierarchy, glorifies consumption, and normalizes the exploitation of labor. Education, religion, media, and culture are all harnessed to create a worldview in which inequality appears natural. Opportunity seems abundant yet selectively distributed, and authority is sanctified. Workers are conditioned to accept their subordination as inevitable and to seek validation within a framework that serves the ruling class. This ideological apparatus convinces the exploited to police themselves, to compete with one another, and to internalize the values of those who profit from their labor. The worker becomes complicit in their own oppression, celebrating the wealth and status of the few as if these achievements were the result of inherent merit rather than the systematic extraction of labor. The myth of meritocracy, the promise of upward mobility, and the valorization of individualism all operate to mask the reality of exploitation and to prevent solidarity among those whose collective strength could challenge the system. Exploitation, the most overt mechanism of control, completes this triad. Capitalism thrives on the appropriation of surplus value, on the transformation of labor in profit that flows not to those who produce it, but to those who own the means of production. The worker is paid a fraction of the value they create, while the remainder is seized by the capitalist, who then reinvests, hoards, or consumes this surplus to perpetuate their dominance. This economic exploitation is not incidental, it is the lifeblood of the system. Every hour of labor, every task completed, every effort expended contribute to the wealth of the few and the continued subjugation of the many. Yet this extraction is hidden beneath a veneer of wages, contracts, and market exchanges, making it appear fair and natural. The laborer is taught to accept this disparity, to view the modest compensation as just, and the profit of the employer as deserved. The worker's time, energy, creativity, and even physical and mental health are commodified, transformed into currency for the enrichment of another, and in this process, the system maintains its dominance. The combination of division, ideology, and exploitation is mutually reinforcing. Division ensures that workers cannot unite and recognize their shared oppression. Ideology convinces them that this division is legitimate, that the hierarchy is natural, and that their own efforts to compete are noble. Exploitation guarantees the material conditions necessary for maintaining the power of the ruling class, providing both the resources and the incentive to sustain the apparatus of control. Each element strengthens the others, creating a cycle that is difficult to break. Workers may struggle individually, but without collective awareness and solidarity, their efforts fail to challenge the underlying structures of power. Capitalism's genius lies in its ability to simultaneously extract maximum value from labor, while minimizing the risk of rebellion through psychological and social manipulation. Yet this system, powerful as it may appear, rests on a fragile foundation: the laboring class itself. The division, the ideology, and the exploitation can only persist because workers are unaware of their own power, because they fail to recognize that their collective labor is the source of all wealth and that society could not function without them. The moment the exploited awaken to their shared conditions, recognize the mechanisms of control, and unite in purpose, the carefully maintained edifice of capitalism begins to shake. Awareness of exploitation and the capacity for solidarity are the antithesis of division, the counterforce to ideology, and the antidote to material subjugation. Every act of collective organization, every recognition of common interest, every effort to reclaim value challenges the very structures that sustain the power of the ruling class. The system's strength depends entirely on the continued passivity, fragmentation, and ignorance of the worker. And this is precisely why awakening consciousness is so threatening, so revolutionary, and so necessary. Solidarity and class consciousness are not abstract ideals. They are the very foundation of revolutionary power. The worker, isolated and unaware, is vulnerable, limited, and subjected to the whims of those who control the means of production. Alone, the laborer may resist in small, fragmented ways, but such isolated struggles are quickly neutralized, absorbed, or suppressed by the mechanisms of the ruling class. Solidarity, the recognition that one's struggle is inseparable from that of others, transforms this vulnerability into strength. When workers unite, they realize that their power is multiplied, that each individual's effort contributes to a collective force capable of challenging and overturning the structures of oppression. This unity is not mere cooperation or casual association. It is a conscious, organized alignment of interests, values, and goals, rooted in the shared experience of exploitation. Solidarity binds the worker to their fellow laborer across industries, regions, and circumstances, creating a network of resistance that transcends the artificial divisions imposed by capitalism. It allows for coordinated action, the pooling of resources, and the amplification of demand, that, when voiced collectively, cannot be ignored, marginalized, or dismissed. Class consciousness is the intellectual and emotional awareness that underpins solidarity. It is the understanding that one's position in society is not determined by individual merit, chance, or divine providence, but by structural relations between those who own and control the means of production and those who labor. Class consciousness emerges when the worker recognizes that their exploitation is not personal or accidental, but systemic, and that the hardships endured are shared across the entire working class. It transforms isolated suffering into collective insight, revealing the social and economic forces that shape life, dictate opportunity, and assign value. Through this awareness, the worker begins to see patterns, to understand history not as a series of disconnected events, but as a continuum of class struggle, and to recognize that revolution is not merely possible but necessary. Class consciousness provides a lens through which exploitation is exposed, illusions are dismantled, and the moral imperative of collective action becomes undeniable. It connects the worker to a larger historical narrative, situating individual experience within the broader struggle of the oppressed against the oppressors. The interplay between solidarity and class consciousness generates revolutionary potential. Solidarity without awareness may result in temporary alliances that crumble under pressure or are co-opted by the ruling class. Class consciousness without solidarity remains theoretical, an understanding that lacks the practical force to effect change. Together they create a dynamic synergy. Consciousness informs and guides solidarity, ensuring that collective action is directed toward the fundamental sources of exploitation. Solidarity reinforces and deepens consciousness as shared experience and coordinate. Struggle illuminate the truths that ideology and division seek to obscure. Workers begin to act not as isolated individuals, but as a united class capable of confronting the structures of power with a coherence and determination that cannot be ignored. Revolutionary potential is also nurtured through education, dialogue, and shared struggle. When workers exchange experiences, analyze the conditions of labor, and connect their personal hardships to systemic patterns, consciousness spreads and deepens. Solidarity is strengthened not only through organized action, but through the recognition of common goals, shared values, and mutual dependence. The worker learns that victories for one are victories for all, and defeats for one are shared across the class, reinforcing the necessity of coordinated effort. Strikes, protests, unions, assemblies, and informal networks all become instruments through which solidarity and consciousness converge, shaping a force capable of challenging exploitation in both subtle and overt ways. Through these mechanisms, workers come to see that their labor is not merely a private transaction, but a collective lever of social transformation. Moreover, solidarity and class consciousness disrupt the ideological control imposed by capitalism. Division, competition, and individualism are the primary tools by which the ruling class maintain dominance, fragmenting workers and obscuring the structural sources of inequality. When workers develop class consciousness and act in solidarity, these tools lose their effectiveness. Rivalries dissolve, false narratives are challenged, and the unity of the laboring class begins to counteract the ideological control of the elite. The recognition that all laborers are bound by a common destiny underpins moral clarity and strategic action, making it increasingly difficult for the ruling class to isolate, manipulate, or suppress resistance. The worker becomes not merely a participant in society, but a conscious agent of change, capable of wielding collective power to challenge exploitation directly. The power of solidarity and class consciousness lies ultimately in their ability to transform perception into action. Awareness of shared conditions converts passive discontent into organized resistance, fragmented effort into coordinated campaigns, and personal suffering into political struggle. It is through these twin forces that the latent revolutionary potential of the working class is awakened, harnessed, and directed toward the overthrow of oppressive systems. Solidarity and class consciousness reveal the worker's true position in society, the structure forces shaping life, and the collective strength that has always existed but remained dormant, waiting for recognition, unity, and action. True liberation is never the product of mere reform, of incremental adjustments, or of the occasional concession granted by those in power. It cannot be bought with minor improvements to wages, token recognition of rights, or superficial regulations that leave the fundamental structures of exploitation intact. Reform, by its very nature, accepts the legitimacy of the system it touches, seeking to improve the conditions of the oppressed, without challenging the authority of the ruling class or the mechanisms through which wealth and power are concentrated. It is a palliative, a method by which the system prolongs its own existence, offering temporary relief while preserving the structures that generate inequality. True liberation, in contrast, demands an understanding of the roots of oppression, a recognition of the structural forces that perpetuate exploitation, and the conscious organization of those who are subjected to it. It is a transformative force that does not merely alleviate suffering, but seeks to overturn the conditions that make suffering inevitable, to reclaim what has been taken, and to establish a society in which the fruits of labor belong to those who produce them. The laboring class cannot rely on the benevolence of the ruling elite to grant freedom or justice. History demonstrates repeatedly that concessions are given reluctantly, only in response to pressure, struggle, and the threat of organized resistance. When workers have demanded improved conditions through isolated appeals or uncoordinated actions, the system has absorbed, deflected, or suppressed them, maintaining its dominance while appearing reasonable. Reform, when not accompanied by collective force, is easily contained. It becomes a tool for pacification, a way of teaching the oppressed to settle for crumbs while the banquet of society remains in the hands of the few. Liberation requires more than accommodation within the existing order. It requires the dismantling of the order itself, the seizure of the instruments of production, and the assertion of collective control over the conditions of life. Without this, improvements are temporary, conditional, and entirely dependent on the whims of those who profit from exploitation. Organized, collective action is the foundation of revolutionary change. Individual efforts, no matter how courageous, are insufficient to challenge systems designed to concentrate power and suppress dissent. When workers unite, pooling their strength, coordinating strategies, and acting with purpose, they create a force that cannot be ignored. Strikes, mass mobilizations, assemblies, and unions are not simply instruments of negotiation. They are manifestations of collective power, tangible expressions of the capacity of labor to disrupt the functioning of society that is otherwise dominated by capital. Through organization, the laboring class transforms latent potential into actionable strength, converting shared grievances into strategic initiatives capable of challenging exploitation directly. Solidarity amplifies the voice of the worker, extends influence across industries and regions, and ensures that action is purposeful rather than fragmented and easily subdued. Revolution, therefore, is not a spontaneous event but the culmination of organized effort, informed awareness, and shared purpose. It arises when workers understand their collective power, recognize the structural nature of their oppression, and act decisively to reclaim what has been denied. True liberation requires the overturning of institutions that concentrate wealth and authority in the hands of a few and the establishment of new relations in which labor is not a commodity to be exploited but the source of collective prosperity and dignity. Every measure that preserves the existing order under the guise of reform is a distraction from this goal, a method of delaying the inevitable assertion of justice. Reform may provide temporary relief, but it cannot uproot exploitation, challenge entrenched hierarchies, or transfer control of society to those who produce its wealth. Moreover, revolutionary action is informed by consciousness, strategy, and vision. It is not merely an expression of frustration but a deliberate, organized attempt to construct a new social order. Workers must understand the mechanisms of capitalism, the ways in which division, ideology, and exploitation sustain dominance, and the necessity of solidarity to overcome these forces. Collective action is guided by this understanding, ensuring that the revolution is not a fleeting eruption but a structured, purposeful transformation capable of enduring and establishing new foundations of justice. Without organization, consciousness alone remains abstract, and individual rebellion is easily crushed. Without vision, action becomes chaotic. An opportunity for genuine transformation is lost. The necessity of revolution over reform is further underscored by the capacity of the ruling class to adapt. History demonstrates that power structures can absorb reforms without surrendering control, presenting concessions as generosity while maintaining fundamental exploitation. True liberation challenges the source of this power directly, demanding not negotiation but reclamation, not compromise but transformation. Workers, through collective organization, exert their only force capable of compelling change. At this level, converting their labor, numbers, and unity into a political and social instrument that cannot be ignored or mitigated through superficial adjustment. The path to liberation is therefore inseparable from collective struggle. It is built upon the recognition of shared exploitation, the cultivation of solidarity, and the strategic application of organized force to dismantle oppressive systems. Reform may ease immediate suffering, but only revolution can dismantle the structures that generate it, transferring control from those who profit from labor to those who create it, ensuring that freedom, dignity, and justice are no longer conditional but inherent, and that the working class finally asserts its rightful place as the architect of society. Every worker carries within themselves the potential to reshape society, to challenge oppression, and to reclaim the power that has been systematically denied. Yet, this potential lies dormant, veiled by the structures of capitalism, obscured by the ideologies imposed by the ruling class, and dulled by the day-to-day demands of survival. The worker's labor sustains the entire edifice of society, providing wealth, innovation, and the very conditions of life, and yet the worker is kept in ignorance of the full magnitude of their power. This ignorance is not accidental. It is a deliberate strategy by those who benefit from exploitation. By keeping laborers divided, preoccupied with individual struggles, and misled by promises of merit or incremental improvement, the system ensures that revolutionary energy remains asleep. The awakening of the worker is therefore both a recognition of injustice and an acknowledgement of inherent strength. It is an intellectual, emotional, and practical transformation that converts subjugation into action, despair into determination, and latent potential into collective force capable of overturning the very structures that have oppressed humanity for centuries. The urgency of awakening arises from the conditions of exploitation themselves. Every day that the worker remains unaware, every hour of labor that is surrendered without comprehension of its full value reinforces the power of the ruling class. The extraction of surplus labor, the perpetuation of inequality, and the manipulation of perception continue uninterrupted, cementing the advantages of those who control society. Poverty, precarity, and oppression are not natural outcomes but engineered consequences, and their perpetuation is dependent upon the inaction and disunity of the working class. Every delay in consciousness allows the mechanisms of division, competition, and ideology to embed themselves more deeply, making the task of liberation more difficult. Urgency is not a rhetorical flourish, it is a material reality. The longer the worker remains asleep, the more entrenched the structures of exploitation become, and the greater the effort required to dismantle them. In recognizing this, the worker comes to see that awakening is not merely desirable, it is necessary. The survival, dignity, and empowerment of the laboring class depend upon immediate recognition of their collective potential and swift mobilization toward action. Inevitability, however, is equally certain. The structures of capitalism, despite their apparent permanence, depend entirely upon the labor of the working class. Factories cannot function without hands to operate machinery. Fields cannot yield crops without toil. Knowledge cannot produce innovations without minds to imagine and implement. And society itself cannot sustain life without labor. This dependence is the foundation of the worker's power, a power that is objective, material, and unstoppable once it is realized. The ruling class may wield ideology, legal systems, and violence to obscure this truth, but the underlying reality remains immutable. The world cannot exist without those who create it. The inevitability of awakening lies in this fundamental imbalance. Once workers recognize their indispensability, once they understand that the wealth and stability of society are built upon their labor, the illusion of subordination crumbles, class consciousness spreads, solidarity strengthens, and the mechanisms of exploitation become vulnerable to challenge. Awakening is not simply a passive realization. It is an active process of transformation that engages both the mind and the body. The worker begins to analyze the systems of oppression, to connect personal experiences with collective conditions, and to recognize the patterns through which division and ideology are enforced. They communicate with fellow laborers, sharing knowledge, organizing efforts, and building networks of mutual support. Each strike, each demand for justice, each act of solidarity is a manifestation of awakening. In practice, demonstrating the capacity of the working class to exert power collectively. The act of awakening transforms the worker from a passive participant in exploitation into an agent of change, capable of shaping not only their own destiny but the destiny of society itself. Moreover, the awakening of the worker challenges the very legitimacy of the ruling class. When laborers understand that their collective action can disrupt production, halt profit, and demand accountability, the veneer of inevitability that protects the elite begins to crack. Authority is revealed as dependent rather than inherent, wealth as appropriate rather than earned, and social hierarchies as enforced rather than natural. The sleeping revolutionary, once awakened, wields not theoretical power but concrete, actionable influence derived from the indispensability of labor. The urgency and inevitability of awakening are therefore intertwined. Delay strengthens the mechanisms of oppression, but the material and social dependence of society on labor ensures that awakening cannot be permanently suppressed. Every moment of consciousness reinforces solidarity. Every organized action demonstrates the potency of collective strength, and every recognition of systemic injustice contributes to the inexorable realization of revolutionary potential. Workers are not victims without recourse. They are creators, sustainers, and shapers of society, and once they recognize this truth, their mobilization becomes a historical certainty, an unstoppable force, poised to reclaim what has been denied and to transform society in accordance with justice, equality, and the full recognition of human dignity, comrade. The truth is undeniable. The world as it stands is built on the labor of the many and the greed of the few. Every worker is a creator of wealth, every act of labor a testament to human power, and every day of exploitation a reminder of the urgency for awakening. Capitalism thrives by dividing, deceiving, and draining us, but its power rests on our ignorance, our disunity, and our acceptance of subjugation. The spark of revolution burns within each of us, waiting for recognition, solidarity, and organized action. Class consciousness transforms isolated suffering into collective strength, and through unity, the latent power of labor becomes unstoppable. Reforms cannot deliver justice, for they leave the roots of oppression untouched. Only revolutionary action, informed by awareness and executed collectively, can reclaim what has been stolen, dismantle exploitation, and build a society in which laborers control their own destiny. Every worker is a sleeping revolutionary, and the time has come to awaken. Rise, recognize your power, unite with your comrades, and act with determination. For the future belongs not to those who hoard wealth, but to those who create it. The hour of revolution is at hand, and it is in our hands to seize it.